Gunfire erupts in a normally quiet home in the middle of the night.
We were sleeping and we heard gunshots. My daughter and her boyfriend were shot.
It's like a bad dream that you just can't wake up from.
It impacted both families in a major way.
It's just such a small town. This is something that just doesn't happen.
But is someone keeping a terrible secret?
He was obsessed with her.
She had promised him that she would get back together with him.
Go home! The things that were going on, I had no idea.
And no one could stop the runaway train that sealed their fate.
I couldn't protect him. None of us could.
She thought she had it under control.
It's no surprise that it ended the way that it did.
She couldn't talk to me. That's the hardest part.
January 23rd, 2021. It's 2:30 on a Saturday morning in Orange, Texas. This border town of 20,000 just across the state line from Louisiana.
Orange is just kind of your basic, small town.
Most people know each other here.
It's a welcoming community.
But in this usually peaceful place, tragedy is about to strike the home of local mother Amanda Smith Gradnigo.
Amanda was in bed and heard something in the kitchen that sounded like somebody dropped a pan, and it just woke her up.
She knew her daughter Aaliyah and her boyfriend TJ had just come home from a trip to Houston.
She thought that Aaliyah and TJ might be in the kitchen cooking.
But after hearing 2 more bangs, she jumps out of bed to make sure everything is okay.
She realized what she thought were sounds of, pots and pans were actually gunshots. As soon as she goes out of her bedroom, she sees in the hallway TJ down on the ground. He had been shot. Oh my God! He is not moving, his eyes are open, so she realizes he's dead.
Amanda's maternal instincts immediately kick in.
I ran straight down the hall to her room.
She sees all the blood, her daughter is shot in her bed.
I just kind of froze.
18-year-old Aaliyah Gradnigo was a beautiful soul.
She was one that lit up her room.
Leah was very heartfelt. She would have many friends and she would always give her hand out to them.
Very lovable. She never really fought with anybody. One of a kind.
And like most teenagers, Aaliyah loved fashion.
She was definitely the fly one in the family. Loved to shop. That was her main thing.
But she was more focused on her future than most people her age.
She had aspirations in life to do great things.
She was enrolled at Lamar University. She was hoping to become a dental hygienist.
The way she would go for that goal, I looked up to that. She didn't let nothing stop her.
Finding love proved harder.
Aaliyah went through a stage where men weren't really treating her right.
But all that changed in November of 2020 when she met a 22-year-old young man named TJ, or T, as his family called him.
Aaliyah and TJ met through a mutual friend.
It was like an instant click. He was just for her.
T was like, we have similar taste in things. She walks like me. She dresses like me.
Aaliyah, old friends. He's just the guy version of me.
But their connection ran far deeper as the couple shared many of the same values.
TJ was a family person for sure. He spoke highly of, his mom, his sisters.
He was a joy to be around, and he always wanted to see the best qualities in every single person.
And he was very future-focused, like Aaliyah, too.
He was working at Lafayette Consolidated Government. He was a wastewater operator. He would test the waters for chemicals.
He was getting promotions on top of promotions, taking tests to get more certifications.
With so much in common, this young couple seemed like the perfect match.
It was a good vibe. The relationship with Aaliyah put T in a place where he felt he can be himself, his true self.
Aaliyah absolutely loved him. Just to see Aaliyah so happy just definitely made me happy.
But now, after discovering a bloodbath in her own home, Aaliyah's mother has called 911.
911, what's the emergency? We woke up to gunshots and my daughter and her boyfriend were shot. Your daughter's what? My daughter has been shot.
I just remember screaming, just like, hurry, just hurry.
Is she conscious? No, she's dead.
Operators inform Aaliyah's mother help is on the way. But the wait feels like an eternity.
It just felt like they were never gonna get there.
When first responders finally arrive, they confirm it's too late for TJ.
He was pronounced deceased.
He's gone.
She's in here, hurry!
But there's still a glimmer of hope for Aaliyah.
All right, you guys back up. Then
They realized, hey, she's still alive.
She still has a pulse.
After meeting her boyfriend TJ Livings just a few months ago, 18-year-old Aaliyah Gradnigo was deeply in love. And so was he.
It's almost like he completed her.
Their relationship was a match in heaven.
But now, Aaliyah's mother has called 911 after finding the couple shot inside the family home.
TJ was on the floor of the bathroom dead.
She's in here, hurry!
But Aaliyah is actually still alive.
Help me get her on the board.
They realized, hey, she might make it. Let's get her to the hospital.
The arriving homicide detective has no idea what he's walking into.
When I arrived on scene, everything's running through your mind. You know, was it family? Was somebody against them?
No matter what, police will need the family's help to solve the case.
I'm gonna figure out who did this.
Thank you.
We asked the family to come down to the Orange Police Department.
With Aaliyah's family in transit to the station, Detective Laughlin begins examining the crime scene.
The male victim, TJ, was deceased inside the residence in the bathroom.
There were 9mm casings found in the area.
Moving to the bedroom, the detective finds more evidence from the shooting.
Another 9mm shell casing was found in the bedroom.
It appeared the suspect entered Aaliyah's bedroom and he shot her point blank in the head.
Investigators then found an iPhone on Aaliyah's bed, which turned out to be Aaliyah's iPhone. And they collected the phone.
Initially, the investigator sees no signs of breaking and entering.
Nothing was really out of place. There was nothing disturbed.
But when they broaden their search, things look different.
I went in the backyard and there was an outdoor chair leaned up against the kitchen window, and it appeared as if somebody had used that chair to enter the house.
The window was open, the blinds were disturbed, and there was also dirt and grass left on the sill.
Get this chair in evidence.
You got it.
They collected the chair to swab it, hoping it might lead to the killer.
With the scene wrapped, the detective heads to the station, while officers remain behind to search the neighborhood for security footage.
Home video surveillance systems are very common nowadays, which helps law enforcement out tremendously.
Is she okay? Is Aaliyah okay?
Back at the station, the detective delivers devastating news to Aaliyah's family.
They did tell us that she didn't survive.
I just remember falling to my knees, not even wanting to believe that, she wasn't here anymore.
Through their grief, the family walks Detective Laughlin through what TJ and Aaliyah did in the hours leading up to the murders.
They said they were going to go to Houston that evening to get tattoos.
Their plan was to return late and for TJ and Aaliyah to spend the night at Aaliyah's home.
Do you know what time they left?
Like 4:30?
Yeah, 4:30.
Aaliyah's mother says that on their way back, she was in constant contact with Aaliyah.
We were texting up until probably an hour before she made it home because I was trying to stay awake to wait for her.
But like most of us, you get tired. And so she fell asleep.
She says that at about 2:30 a.m., a loud noise jolted her awake.
What she would do when she gets home, she would come and wake me up, but that night she didn't.
So when she heard these bangs, she went to go investigate.
And that's when she got the shock of her life.
She saw TJ on the floor of the bathroom dead, and then went, of course, directly to Aaliyah's room. Aaliyah was shot in the temple.
It was like living a nightmare.
Though Amanda's story helps Detective Laughlin fill in some blanks, it still leaves one major question.
Was it targeted towards TJ or was it towards Aaliyah?
Do you know if Aaliyah and TJ had any enemies?
No, they were good kids.
I could have never come up with someone that could have done this.
I thought like maybe on the way back from Houston, they got in an argument with somebody on the street. Maybe someone followed them home.
I know it sounds crazy, but we were trying to figure out what happened.
I'll keep you updated with any information I receive. Let me show you out.
In the meantime, TJ's family has also received news of his tragic passing.
They told my mom over the phone that T had passed away and that the detective wanted to speak to my mom.
I started screaming. It was just a shock. I felt like I wanted to throw up.
When his mother arrives at the station, Detective Laughlin is waiting to meet with her.
He proceeded to tell me what had happened. And I could tell in his eyes that he wanted to get to the bottom of it.
But like Aaliyah's family, TJ's mother is at a loss for who could have done this.
Everyone loved him.
My brother wasn't involved in anything that would warrant that.
Okay, let me escort you out.
Thank you.
Police records support the family's claims.
Aaliyah and TJ did not have a criminal record. They were upstanding, good citizens.
But the detective is about to receive an important tip about a potential suspect.
Detective.
Yes.
The girl arrived at the police station who was adamant about speaking to me.
How can I help you?
She was actually Aaliyah's best friend, and she informed me that Aaliyah had an ex-boyfriend.
Okay.
He was crazy obsessed about her. His name is Menka Nelson.
Just hours after the murders of Aaliyah Gradnigo and TJ Livings, Aaliyah's friend Tammy has arrived at the station.
Tammy came to speak to one of the detectives on the case.
He was crazy obsessed.
She indicated that she believed that someone named Menka Nelson could possibly be involved.
They kind of dated on and off.
According to Tammy, Aaliyah had met Menka years ago at her aunt's house.
He was a friend of Aaliyah's cousin. Aaliyah was probably around 13 years old, and Menka was probably 18 or 19 years old.
Though her friend says Menka and Aaliyah immediately clicked, Aaliyah's mother forbade her daughter from having any more contact with him.
Aaliyah's mother, Amanda, had come over to the house that day too, and she was alarmed when she saw Menka there, partly because of the age difference and also partly because she just didn't have a good feeling about him.
But Aaliyah's friend says that despite her mother's warnings, Aaliyah continued to communicate with Menka.
Teenagers, they think everything that they do is the right thing. They're not wanting to listen to parents.
And soon, Aaliyah was seeing Menka again, in secret.
Aaliyah never told her family because she knew that they would not approve.
Just a few of Aaliyah's very close friends knew anything about it.
At first, Tammy liked Menka, but her impression of him quickly changed for the worse.
It just got so toxic.
He was controlling and just possessive.
So Tammy was relieved when Aaliyah finally ended things with him.
She told him she was done.
Except Tammy says Menka refused to let Aaliyah go.
He did not take that well. He threatened to kill himself.
She didn't want that on her shoulders.
So she was always trying to stay in good graces with him.
But Tammy admits that became all but impossible once Menka learned about TJ.
On several occasions, Menka told her he was coming to find her and coming to take her back.
The situation came to a head one night after Menka learned where TJ lived.
One night, Manka showed up at TJ's. He was pounding on the door, demanding that Aaliyah come out. Aaliyah eventually came to the door. She refused to open it.
Go home or I'm gonna call the police. I'm serious.
All right.
Tammy says Aaliyah hoped that would be the end of it once Menka realized she had actually moved on.
You okay?
She thought she had it under control and that he wouldn't do anything to hurt her.
Though now, Tammy is all but certain Menka is responsible for her friend's murder.
In her heart, she felt that he was the only person who could actually even be in consideration of this.
And did he know where she lived?
For sure.
Okay. Well, thank you. I will show you out.
When the detective pulls Menka's record, he seems like someone capable of this kind of crime.
He had charges of second-degree murder and armed robbery. Somehow those charges were dropped, but that obviously creates a red flag for police.
But when the detective brings up Menka's name with Aaliyah's family, they seem taken aback.
Aaliyah's mom didn't know about the relationship. Neither did her sister.
It just kind of threw me off because I hadn't heard that name in years. My nephew and him, they were friends, but never in a million years would I've ever thought that this would ever have happened.
And TJ's family has never heard of Menka.
Aaliyah's family knew who he was, but we had no clue.
I'm just baffled. I have 1,000,001 questions.
Menka is now considered the police's prime suspect, but there is still no proof he committed this double homicide.
There's no real evidence.
Detective.
But there may be some in the surveillance footage recovered from the Gradnagos neighborhood.
I received information from another detective that he had obtained video footage of her and TJ pulling into the house. And a few minutes later, a white 2005 Buick LeSabre passes by the front of her house very slowly. It had dark tinted windows. It goes down a block, and then we see a male subject walking toward the house.
In Orange, Texas, the detective investigating the murders of Aaliyah Gradnago and her boyfriend, TJ Livings, have identified a suspect, 24-year-old Menka Melson.
Her best friend told me that he was obsessed with her.
Police have also uncovered surveillance footage from the Gradnagos neighborhood on the morning of the crime. But could it prove Manka's guilt?
The man in a hoodie and some sweatpants goes around to the side of the home, which would be where the window is.
A few minutes later, we hear a gunshot.
So we know that Aaliyah was shot first because it was a single gunshot.
And then 30 seconds later, we hear 2 gunshots.
Those are going to be the shots that he fired when he murdered TJ.
A minute and a half later, we see a male subject running back toward where that 2005 white Buick LeSabre was parked. And then we have video footage of that car leaving the neighborhood at a very high rate of speed.
But the footage isn't clear enough to confirm the shooter's identity.
You can make out a person, but you can't tell who it is.
Nonetheless, because the suspect's stature and race match Manka Melson's, he remains a target of the investigation.
I have got to go find this Manka Melson guy.
The detective starts with Manka's mother's home in nearby Benton, Louisiana.
When I got there, knocked on her door, she instantly just started crying.
I'm a detective here to talk to you.
Manka had called her recently, and he was upset. He was really hurt about hearing about Aaliyah's death.
She said, he told me he didn't do it and this and that, and I told him to go to the police.
I tried to get him to go to the police to clear his name.
And how did he respond?
He said he wouldn't go.
And he actually hung up on his mother.
Since then, she'd been trying to reach him.
She tried to call several times, he wouldn't answer.
So you don't know where he is right now?
I don't.
Okay, well, if you hear anything, please let me know.
Luckily, the detective has gotten another lead from Benton police.
I contacted a friend of mine over there and asked him if he was familiar with a Manka Melson, and he said absolutely, and he said, I'm pretty sure I know where he's staying. So I ended up going to a house in Benton and met with the residents who lived there.
Jimmy Ballard tells police that Manka had been staying with him the past few weeks.
They were friends from school.
He said that he didn't have anywhere to stay and he'd been staying with him.
When asked whether he saw him late Friday night or early Saturday morning, he confirms he did.
About 3 a.m., he came into the house.
Although Jimmy says he went to bed shortly thereafter, a call about Aaliyah's death woke him around 5 a.m.
So Jimmy went into Manka Melson's bedroom and woke him up.
What's up, man?
He said he was still fully clothed, which he said was very odd.
Do you remember what he was wearing?
Yeah, a hoodie and sweatpants. Aaliyah's dead. She was killed.
The same outfit as the man who was seen on the Ring doorbell camera.
What? Yeah.
According to Jimmy, Manka seemed disturbed by the news of Aaliyah's death.
He got up, he smoked a cigarette, and was pacing back and forth.
Man, I gotta go. Why? Did you have something to do with this? No, why would I?
He packed a few of his things, not much, and left all of his belongings there at the house.
He's like, if you didn't do it, why are you leaving?
If you didn't, just go to the cops, man. Clear your name. I just gotta go.
Jimmy was aware of Manka and Aaliyah's breakup.
He was upset about Aaliyah. He had been depressed and not really himself.
But he never suspected he was so upset that he would harm her.
Why is that?
Because Aaliyah wasn't his only girl.
Manka Melson had all the women he wanted. He had girlfriend after girlfriend.
But when police asked Jimmy what Manka was driving the night of the murder, it's another strike against him.
He'd been driving a motorcycle, but a week prior, he got in a major motorcycle accident. Now he was driving a 2005 white Buick.
The description matches the vehicle on the surveillance camera.
So the police step up their search for Manka.
The minute that we started looking for him, we started receiving good information. There was a lot of people coming forward.
Then on January 25th, 2 days after the murders, the detective gets a surprise call from the suspect himself.
Homicide.
He said he heard that I wanted to speak with him. And I said, absolutely. I said, I'd love to speak with you. And so he said, I'll be at the police station in a little bit.
We've been looking to talk to you.
On January 25th, after contacting the lead detective in the murder investigation of Aaliyah Gradnigo and TJ Livings, suspect Menka Melson tells police he's coming in to give a statement.
I asked him where he was, and of course he wouldn't tell me.
Nonetheless, at 3:30 in the afternoon, Menka arrives at the station, true to his word.
Really appreciate you coming up here on your own, talking to me.
Menka immediately informs the detective that he knows he's their primary suspect.
I've been told that I killed my ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend.
He also knows their recent breakup makes him look bad.
I was depressed and stuff like that because, and I understand this is the person that I'm in love with.
But he insists he would never harm her.
He tells Laughlin that Aaliyah was the love of his life.
Go home or I'm gonna call the police.
Not at any point in time I ever threatened her, no nothing.
In fact, Menka insists his pain made him turn inward.
I threatened to take my life because I was sad. Yeah. I was hurt. Right.
That's when the detective brings TJ into the conversation.
Did you know she was dating somebody?
Yeah, we talked about this.
Though he admits he was jealous at first, he says Aaliyah quickly eased his fears.
She had promised him that she would get back together with him.
Why would I take her life if she told me we were going to be back together?
Besides, he insists that through it all, they remained friends.
I talk to her every day.
The date of the incident, did you talk to her?
Yes, sir.
Menka says that Aaliyah told him she was going to Houston.
That they were going to get tattoos.
Who was they?
She said her and her cousin. She didn't tell me until after the fact that, that she was with her boyfriend.
The detective then asks Menka where he was the night of the murders.
He said he drove to Beaumont about 9 o'clock and met up with a girl that he identified as Jasmine, somebody he was saying. Then he drove toward Houston. I asked him, what were you going to do in Houston? And he said, I was going to sell my car to a guy.
But he claims that the buyer stopped responding to his calls.
So he said he stopped him. He turned around in Baytown.
After that, he says he went home and talked on the phone to Jasmine.
They were chatting until he fell asleep.
He also insists that he doesn't even know where Aaliyah lived.
You've never been to her house?
Her parents.
Of course, this conflicts with what Aaliyah's friend Tammy already told them.
And when they ask him what vehicle he drives, Menka looks even more guilty.
I had a car.
What kind of car was it?
I had a white Buick.
He ended up telling me that he had sold this vehicle 2 days after the homicide.
Who'd you sell it to? Some chick from Houston. I don't know her name.
That's when the detective puts Menka on the spot.
I had a picture of Aaliyah, and I slid that picture across the desk in front of him. He never made eye contact with that picture. The minute that I saw that, I knew that we had the guy.
So he confronts Menka with their evidence.
Have you ever heard of Ring doorbell system?
Yes, sir.
I started asking him some more questions, maybe a little bit harder questions that he didn't want to answer.
Am I under arrest? No. I'm not under arrest. I just want to...
You do not want to discuss this anymore?
It was a sick feeling having to let him go, but I knew that there was more evidence to get in order to have a sealed case to give the families closure.
So Detective Laughlin keeps pushing.
Yes, hello, is Jasmine there?
I ended up contacting Jasmine, the girl that Mank had been dating.
Do you know a young man named Manka Melson?
She shared that they met on Tinder and they had been hooking up for several weeks.
Did you see him the night of January 22nd?
She's responding, yes. He'd come up there to her work for about 20 minutes. She said that he was driving a 2005 white Buick LeSabre and that he was wearing a hoodie and sweatpants.
The same exact clothing that was in the Ring doorbell camera.
Did you talk to him again after that?
She said that she got on the phone with him about 3 o'clock in the morning, 3:05, and she said that they pretty much fall asleep on the phone together, but she said that she hadn't heard from him since.
The police also make headway locating Manka's car.
The detectives were able to determine that he had in fact sold his car in Vinton.
It was in the possession of one of his friends that he hangs out with, and she had bought it.
Obviously, he lied to the police about who he sold it to because he didn't want them to find it.
It had a window tint across the windshield, so we could match that car up with the car that we saw in the videos.
Investigators in Orange, Texas have just located murder suspect Manka Melson's car and determined it's the same Buick seen in the crime scene footage.
It had a lot of aftermarket features to it that set it apart from your average, Buick.
And Detective Laughlin has also gone through Aaliyah's phone, which revealed a treasure trove of evidence.
They found a text thread between Aaliyah and someone who was identified in her phone as Allison. And they were able to determine that the phone number that was associated in the contacts with Allison belonged to Manka Melson. In between December 2nd of 2020 and the night of the murder, there were approximately 10,100 text messages between Manka Melson and Aaliyah. Sitting down and reading those from start to finish is like reading a horror novel.
The messages make it clear that if Aaliyah was once in love with Manka, the tides had clearly shifted.
It is obvious that Aaliyah is trying to distance herself from Manka Melson.
But Manka had no intention of letting her go.
He's talking about how she doesn't respond to him.
He's wondering where she was, wondering what she was doing, wondering what she was wearing. He was on her constantly.
And his text messages to Aaliyah only get more disturbing.
He's like, I've got a gun right now. I'm gonna kill myself if I can't be with you. Of course, in the meantime, we know that he had other girlfriends. So this was a control thing.
Through it all, Aaliyah tried to keep him at bay.
I could tell by reading these text messages that she's playing a defense game with him.
She's telling him she loves him, we'll be together again someday. That was the only mechanism that she really had to deal with this.
She really thought she could control it, but it was bigger than her. It makes me sad that she couldn't talk to me. That's the hardest part.
Equally tragic, it's unlikely TJ ever knew he was in imminent danger.
While TJ may have heard Manka's name or known about him, police don't think he had any idea about the real role he played in Aaliyah's life.
Aaliyah! Who's that?
Aaliyah didn't share this really with anybody.
To find out that your family member is gone and it's a result of a situation that he wasn't aware of, it's just very difficult.
Though police now have enough evidence to nail Manka, more is yet to come.
The person who entered the home took an outdoor patio chair and placed that chair up against the window.
We were able to get some DNA off of the chair that we were able to link Manka to.
On April 29, 2021, police obtain an arrest warrant for Menka Melson on charges of capital murder.
We had located him where he was staying, so we surrounded the area. And then at that time, we called him out on microphone, and it maybe took 4 or 5 minutes. He eventually came out, got on his knees, and we were able to place him in handcuffs.
For the families, it's been a long time coming.
When the arrest was made, it was definitely a huge relief off of our shoulders.
I commend all of them for doing what they did.
On February 14th, 2022, when Menka's trial opens, the families face the defendant in court.
Menka Melson was very unemotional, very cold.
The trial was really, really hard. Just seeing him sitting there with no kind of emotion.
In their opening statements, the prosecution describes Menka's motive as cold but simple.
He felt rejected and was unable to process that in a healthy way. And so that ultimately led to his actions of taking both of their lives.
Prosecutors know that on the night before the murder, Menka had the means to follow Aaliyah.
That evening, they were sharing their locations.
And cell phone tower information proves he was on her tail leading up to the shootings.
She and TJ, they were over in the Houston area, and around 9 o'clock in the evening, he sets out for Houston.
Though he told detectives he had turned around in Baytown, that was untrue. He had went all the way to Houston.
The whole time, he and Aaliyah are texting, and he knows she's at the tattoo shop with TJ. When they finish up at the tattoo parlor and turn around and head home, he follows them.
But at 1:41 a.m., when Aaliyah and TJ entered her family's home, they had no idea Menka was right behind them.
Aaliyah goes on into her bedroom, and TJ went to take a shower.
A short while later, Menka entered the home through the kitchen window.
He went first to Aaliyah's bedroom, where she laid in the bed, probably asleep. He shot and killed her. And then, as he's coming back out, that's when he shoots TJ twice in the neck area, kills him, and then goes back out the window that he came in.
The evidence against Menka is overwhelming.
This was probably the most sewed up, tightly run trial that I've ever participated in.
So it's no surprise when on February 18th, 2022, the jury returns with a verdict of guilty on both murder counts.
Upon his conviction, he was automatically sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
While Aaliyah and TJ's families are grateful, no punishment can make up for the loss of these two beautiful young people.
Justice was served, as far as the law goes. Yes, but it doesn't change the outcome. T is still gone. Aaliyah is still gone. That pain stays. It hurts every single day.
We're forever gonna have that missing piece to the puzzle for our families, and it's just not fair at all. I have so much anger, because he has taken away two important people.
Today, knowing that Aaliyah suffered in silence remains painful for both families.
It was heartbreaking as a mother to know she was dealing with so much. I don't know if I could have prevented it, but we could have been more prepared.
If you are in the position that Aaliyah was in, you may be scared, or you think that no one cares, or no one can help you, but you won't know if you don't try. Aaliyah's family loved her. We loved T, without a doubt. If one word was said, just maybe, we could have done something before it got to this.
If someone is going through what Aaliyah was going through, tell someone. You can't rewind time.
David Parker Ray never stood trial for murder. No jury ever convicted him of taking a life. No body was ever conclusively linked to him. Yet decades after his arrest, his name continues to appear in conversations about the most disturbing criminal investigations in American history. It is not because of what prosecutors proved in court. It is because of what investigators discovered after one woman managed to do something they believe very few ever accomplished. She escaped. In the early spring of 1999, Elephant Butte, New Mexico, was much like it had always been, nestled beside one of the largest reservoirs in the state. It was a quiet desert community where retirees, fishermen, campers, and tourists drifted through without much concern. The roads were long and dusty, the houses scattered, and neighbors often kept to themselves. It was the kind of place where silence was ordinary, where people rarely questioned what happened behind closed doors. Nothing about the town suggested that it would soon become the center of one of the most infamous criminal investigations in the United States. Behind one seemingly ordinary property stood a large trailer. To anyone passing by, it looked like nothing more than an old recreational vehicle sitting beside a mechanic's workshop. There was no obvious sign that anything unusual existed there. There were no screams heard by neighbors, no frantic calls for help, no obvious evidence visible from the road. Yet investigators would later describe what they found inside as one of the most elaborate crime scenes they had ever encountered. That trailer had a name given to it by its owner. He called it the Toy Box. Long before police ever stepped onto the property, David Parker Ray had spent years living a life that appeared almost completely ordinary. He worked as a mechanic and later as a maintenance worker at Elephant Butte State Park. He understood engines, tools, electrical systems, and construction. Friends and neighbors saw a quiet man who knew how to repair machinery and preferred keeping to himself. Nothing about his daily routine suggested that he would one day become the subject of an investigation involving hundreds of pieces of evidence, multiple surviving victims, and years of unanswered questions. But on March 22, 1999, events began unfolding that would expose the carefully hidden world Ray had built. Among the people who would forever change the course of the investigation was a woman named Cynthia Vigil. According to investigators, Vigil had been taken to Ray's property and held there against her will. What happened during her captivity would later become an important part of the criminal case. But the most significant moment came not while Ray was present. It came after he left. The following morning, David Parker Ray went to work as he normally did. Remaining behind at the property was Cindy Hendy, Ray's girlfriend and later his co-defendant. At some point, an opportunity appeared. Hendy became distracted. Vigil noticed that the key needed to free herself was within reach. It was a moment that may have lasted only seconds, but those seconds would determine everything that followed. Vigil managed to obtain the key and release herself from her restraints. She knew there might not be another chance. She fled the property as quickly as she could, running across unfamiliar ground toward the nearest sign of help. She arrived at a nearby residence frightened, exhausted, and desperate. The people inside immediately recognized that something was terribly wrong. They contacted emergency services without hesitation. That single telephone call would become the turning point in a case that investigators believe had remained hidden for years. When officers arrived, they found Cynthia Vigil visibly distressed. Her account was unlike anything they expected to hear. This was not a simple report of assault or kidnapping. She described a property where she had been held against her will and told officers about a trailer equipped for confinement. Even before a search warrant had been obtained, experienced investigators realized they might be dealing with something far larger than an isolated crime. Cases involving unlawful imprisonment are unfortunately not unknown to law enforcement. But Vigil's description suggested planning, preparation, and a level of organization that immediately raised concern. Officers secured the area while investigators began verifying her statements. Every detail mattered. Every minute counted. If her account was accurate, evidence inside the property could disappear if action was delayed. Search warrants were prepared. Investigators assembled teams. Soon, local authorities would be joined by state and federal agencies. As police entered the property, they began documenting everything they saw. The trailer that Ray referred to as the toy box became the immediate focus of the investigation. Inside, officers discovered a carefully constructed environment unlike anything they had anticipated. According to official reports, investigators recovered restraints, chains, medical equipment, homemade devices, recording equipment, video cameras, cassette tapes, handwritten notes, diagrams, and numerous personal belongings believed to have belonged to victims. They also discovered hundreds of items of clothing and jewelry whose owners could not immediately be identified. Every room seemed to raise more questions than answers. The quantity of evidence suggested that the trailer had not been prepared for a single incident. Instead, investigators began to suspect it had been used repeatedly over an extended period of time. As forensic teams carefully photographed and cataloged every object, the scope of the investigation expanded almost by the hour. The discovery transformed what began as a kidnapping investigation into one of the largest criminal inquiries in New Mexico's history. The FBI became involved. Specialists examined videotapes, cassette recordings, handwritten documents, and every physical item removed from the property. Among the most unsettling discoveries was a cassette recording approximately 45 minutes in length. Investigators concluded that it had been created to intimidate and psychologically control victims. The recording would later become one of the most significant pieces of evidence introduced during legal proceedings because it illustrated the degree of planning involved in Ray's crimes. Yet despite the enormous amount of evidence recovered, investigators immediately faced a troubling problem. There were no bodies. Nothing at the property conclusively proved that anyone had been murdered there. The evidence strongly supported charges involving kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and sexual violence, but homicide requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. Without identifiable human remains or direct forensic evidence connecting Ray to a killing, prosecutors faced legal limitations that would shape the case from beginning to end. As news of the arrest spread across New Mexico, and then across the United States, journalists descended upon Elephant Butte. Television cameras lined the roads leading toward Ray's property. Residents who had lived quietly beside him for years struggled to understand what investigators were describing. Many later admitted they had never suspected anything unusual. To them, David Parker Ray had simply been another resident of a small community. Now his property was surrounded by investigators wearing protective suits, carrying evidence boxes, and documenting what appeared to be years of carefully concealed criminal activity. Almost immediately, another question emerged. If Cynthia Vigil had escaped, had there been others? Investigators began reviewing missing persons reports from New Mexico and neighboring states. They compared names, dates, photographs, and locations. They examined the hundreds of personal belongings recovered during the search, hoping that someone would recognize a piece of clothing or a piece of jewelry. At least 3 survivors would eventually be identified and testify, while investigators interviewed additional women who may also have encountered Ray. Yet even as the investigation grew larger, certainty remained elusive. Suspicion alone could not replace evidence. Rumors began circulating that the number of victims might be far greater than anyone initially believed. Some investigators wondered whether the case extended back many years. Others questioned whether there might be victims who would never be identified. Those questions would ultimately define the David Parker Ray investigation. It became a case balanced between what could be demonstrated in a courtroom and what investigators believe may have happened but could never conclusively prove. As the evidence continued to accumulate, one fact remained undeniable. Had Cynthia Vigil failed to escape that morning, authorities might never have discovered the trailer hidden behind David Parker Ray's home. The investigation that followed would expose an elaborate operation concealed behind the ordinary life of a mechanic in a quiet New Mexico town, revealing a mystery that, even today, remains only partially solved. David Parker Ray was not the kind of man who attracted attention. Long before investigators associated his name with one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in modern American history, he lived a life that appeared almost invisible. There were no headlines, no public scandals, and no reputation that suggested extraordinary violence. To many people who crossed paths with him, he was simply another middle-aged mechanic living in a quiet New Mexico community. That ordinary appearance would later become one of the most unsettling aspects of the entire case. It forced investigators, journalists, and the public to confront a difficult reality. Some of the most carefully concealed crimes are committed not by people who stand out, but by those who seem determined never to be noticed at all. David Parker Ray was born on November 6, 1939, in Belen, New Mexico. His early years were marked by instability. His parents divorced while he was still a child, and his father was largely absent from his upbringing. Instead, Ray spent much of his childhood being raised by his grandfather. Although many children experience difficult family circumstances without ever committing violent crimes, investigators later examined Ray's early life in an attempt to understand how he eventually became the central figure in such a complex criminal investigation. According to information that emerged during the case, Ray developed disturbing interests while he was still young. Investigators later learned that he had collected violent pornographic material and nurtured deviant fantasies over many decades. These discoveries would become part of the broader effort to understand the psychological world he had carefully hidden from almost everyone around him. Still, it is important to recognize that no single childhood experience can explain or predict criminal behavior. Many people endure hardship without harming others, and investigators never claimed that Ray's upbringing alone accounted for the crimes for which he was eventually convicted. After reaching adulthood, Ray served for a period in the United States military. The available records concerning his service do not suggest that it attracted widespread public attention, and after leaving the military, he returned to civilian life in New Mexico. Like countless others, he sought steady employment and built practical skills that would support him for decades. He worked as a mechanic, repairing vehicles and machinery, and developed a reputation for being highly capable with tools and equipment. Eventually, he found work as a maintenance employee at Elephant Butte State Park. It was stable employment that fit his mechanical abilities, and from the outside there was little reason for anyone to question the life he had built. Those who knew him generally described a man who preferred keeping to himself. He was not known as someone who sought the spotlight or became deeply involved in community activities. He possessed technical knowledge, understood engines and electrical systems, and could solve practical problems that many other people could not. These skills, admirable in themselves, would later take on a far darker significance when investigators discovered how they had allegedly been used behind closed doors. Mechanical knowledge can build homes, repair equipment, or maintain public facilities. In Ray's case, investigators believed those same abilities had been redirected toward constructing something entirely different. One of the recurring themes that emerged during the investigation was the contrast between appearance and reality. During the day, Ray lived what seemed to be a conventional existence. He went to work, earned a living, interacted with neighbors, and returned home. Nothing about that routine immediately suggested criminal activity on the scale investigators would later uncover. This duality fascinated criminal investigators because it demonstrated how carefully some offenders separate their public identity from their private behavior. According to the evidence later collected, Ray spent years developing a hidden environment that almost no one outside his closest circle ever saw. Sometime during the late 1980s, he acquired a large trailer. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about it. In rural parts of New Mexico, trailers, workshops, storage buildings, and recreational vehicles are common sights. A trailer parked beside a property attracted little attention. Yet investigators would later determine that Ray invested approximately $100,000, transforming that ordinary vehicle into something very different from its original purpose. The modifications were not completed quickly. According to investigators, they were the result of years of planning, construction, and refinement. Every alteration suggested patience rather than impulse. Ray's experience as a mechanic allowed him to perform complex modifications himself. He understood structural materials, electrical wiring, lighting systems, and mechanical devices. Rather than relying heavily on outside contractors who might ask questions, much of the work appears to have been completed using his own technical abilities. The trailer was extensively soundproofed. This feature would later become one of the most discussed aspects of the investigation because it reflected deliberate planning rather than spontaneous criminal behavior. Soundproofing requires time, money, and knowledge. It also indicates anticipation. Investigators believe this was not something built for a single event, but rather a location, intended for repeated use over an extended period. Inside, according to the evidence later documented by law enforcement, the trailer contained restraints, chains, recording equipment, lighting systems, mirrors, medical equipment, homemade devices, storage areas, and numerous other items carefully positioned throughout the confined space. Everything investigators observed suggested that the interior had been designed with a specific purpose in mind. Even before every piece of evidence had been analyzed, officers recognized that they were looking at an environment unlike anything encountered in most criminal investigations. David Parker Ray himself reportedly referred to this trailer as the Toy Box. The name would soon become infamous across the United States, appearing in newspapers, documentaries, books, and criminal justice discussions. Yet behind the sensational nickname was a much more important reality. The trailer represented years of preparation. It embodied planning, organization, and an apparent determination to keep criminal activity hidden from public view. Investigators would later describe it not as a chaotic crime scene, but as a carefully constructed environment where nearly every object appeared to have been intentionally placed. Another important aspect of Ray's life involved the people around him. The investigation eventually determined that he did not always operate alone. His girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, became a central figure in the criminal case. According to court records, Hendy participated in at least some of the offenses for which both individuals were prosecuted. Her involvement became particularly significant because it was during a period when Ray had left for work and Hendy remained behind that Cynthia Vigil found the opportunity to escape. Without that moment, investigators might never have discovered what existed inside the trailer. Ray's daughter, Glenda Jean Ray, also became part of the broader investigation. Ultimately, she cooperated with prosecutors and provided information concerning aspects of her father's activities. In exchange for that cooperation, she received immunity regarding certain matters addressed during the investigation. Her testimony contributed to investigators' understanding of the case, although many questions would remain unanswered even after years of inquiry. As detectives reconstructed Ray's daily life, they became increasingly interested in how successfully he had maintained his public image. Friends, acquaintances, and neighbors were interviewed extensively. Many struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the evidence emerging from his property. This reaction is common in major criminal investigations involving offenders who maintain apparently ordinary lives. People naturally search for warning signs they may have overlooked. Yet in many cases, there are few obvious indicators visible to outsiders. That realization can be deeply unsettling because it challenges assumptions about how dangerous individuals should appear. For investigators, however, appearances mattered far less than evidence. Every document, every recording, every handwritten note, and every physical object recovered from Ray's property became part of an enormous effort to establish facts rather than speculation. They understood that public outrage alone could never replace the legal standards required in court. Every allegation had to be supported by evidence capable of surviving scrutiny from defense attorneys, judges, and juries. This distinction would later become especially important when questions arose concerning possible murders that investigators suspected but could not conclusively prove. As the investigation expanded, David Parker Ray increasingly came to symbolize a troubling contradiction. On one hand stood the image visible to the outside world, a mechanic, a maintenance worker, a technically skilled man living in a small desert town. On the other stood the evidence collected after Cynthia Vigil's escape, a heavily modified trailer. Extensive recordings, handwritten materials, personal belongings linked to victims, and indications that criminal conduct had continued over an extended period. Between those two images lay one of the central questions that still surrounds the case today. How could such an elaborate operation remain hidden for so long? The answer, investigators concluded, was not found in dramatic disguises or extraordinary deception. Instead, it rested in the ordinary routines of everyday life, the isolation of the surrounding landscape, and the assumption shared by many communities that terrible crimes happen somewhere else, to someone else, committed by someone who looks unmistakably dangerous. In Elephant Butte, those assumptions would be shattered forever. The search warrant transformed suspicion into evidence. Until investigators crossed the threshold of David Parker Ray's property, everything they knew had come primarily from the account of Cynthia Vigil. Her escape had provided law enforcement with probable cause to investigate. But officers could not yet know whether the scene would confirm her story or contradict it. Experienced detectives are trained to remain cautious in the earliest stages of any investigation. Witnesses can misremember events, crime scenes can present unexpected explanations, and assumptions made too quickly can derail an entire case. Yet within minutes of entering Ray's property, investigators began to understand that this was no ordinary investigation. Every room, every object, and every discovery suggested that they had encountered something carefully planned and maintained over a long period of time. Behind the main residence stood the trailer that Ray himself referred to as the toy box. From the outside, it looked remarkably ordinary. In rural New Mexico, trailers and recreational vehicles were common sights, and nothing about its exterior immediately distinguished it from countless others parked across the region. That ordinary appearance would later become symbolic of the entire investigation. The greatest shock was not what neighbors could see from the road, but what had remained hidden behind closed doors for years. As officers entered the trailer, they immediately shifted into methodical evidence collection. Crime scene investigators understood that every object had potential evidentiary value. Nothing was touched until it had been photographed. Every surface was documented. Measurements were taken. Evidence markers appeared throughout the confined interior as technicians carefully recorded the condition and location of every item before removal. The goal was not simply to collect objects, but to preserve their exact relationship to one another. In court, that precision could become as important as the objects themselves. According to investigators, the interior reflected extensive planning rather than improvisation. The trailer had been modified over time using Ray's mechanical knowledge and technical skills. Among the items documented were restraints, chains, medical equipment, homemade devices, mirrors, specialized lighting, recording equipment, and storage areas containing numerous personal belongings. Investigators also recovered video cameras and audio recording equipment, suggesting that activities inside the trailer had been documented. Rather than finding a chaotic environment, detectives described an organized space in which nearly every element appeared to have been intentionally positioned. This observation would influence the direction of the investigation from that point forward. The arrangement suggested preparation extending over years rather than the actions of someone acting impulsively. One of the most significant discoveries was a collection of handwritten notes and diagrams. These documents became important because they provided investigators with insight into how the trailer had been organized and used. Unlike physical objects whose purpose might require interpretation, written materials can sometimes reveal planning in the words of the person who created them. Every page was carefully preserved, photographed, and later analyzed alongside the other evidence collected from the property. Investigators also located numerous cassette tapes. Among them was one recording that would become central to the criminal case. The cassette lasted approximately 45 minutes and, according to investigators, had been prepared to intimidate and psychologically control victims. Rather than serving as a spontaneous conversation, it appeared to be a carefully constructed recording intended for repeated use. Prosecutors later viewed the tape as particularly significant because it demonstrated forethought and organization. It illustrated that psychological domination formed part of a larger system rather than arising from isolata moments. The recording would eventually become one of the most discussed pieces of evidence associated with the investigation, not because of sensational details, but because it reflected deliberate preparation. Alongside the recording equipment, investigators recovered a remarkable quantity of personal belongings. More than 400 items of clothing, jewelry, and other personal effects were cataloged. Many could not immediately be linked to specific individuals. For detectives, this presented both an opportunity and a challenge. Every unidentified object represented the possibility of identifying another victim. Yet without names or direct forensic links, each item also raised difficult questions. Investigators carefully photographed and documented every article before beginning the painstaking task of comparing them with missing persons reports and information provided by families searching for loved ones. The sheer volume of property suggested that the investigation might extend far beyond the events surrounding Cynthia Vigil's escape. As evidence continued to accumulate, local authorities requested assistance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The scope of the case had grown beyond what a small community could reasonably process alone. FBI specialists joined local investigators in examining videotapes, audio recordings, handwritten documents, and physical evidence recovered from the property. Every tape required review. Every document required transcription and analysis. Every recovered object required cataloging and comparison with existing investigative databases. This process demanded patience as much as urgency. Detectives understood that solving complex cases often depends less on dramatic breakthroughs than on thousands of careful, methodical decisions. The presence of recording equipment raised additional investigative questions. Officers sought to determine when the equipment had been used, how frequently recordings had been made, and whether any identifiable individuals appeared in the materials recovered. Such work required both technical expertise and extraordinary sensitivity, particularly when attempting to identify potential victims while respecting their privacy and preserving evidence for court proceedings. The investigation expanded beyond Ray's property as detectives began reviewing missing persons cases from New Mexico and neighboring states. They searched for possible connections between names, dates, and locations. Families who had spent years searching for missing relatives watched the unfolding investigation with cautious hope and understandable anxiety. Investigators knew they could not offer certainty where evidence did not yet exist. Every possible lead required verification before any conclusion could be reached. This commitment to evidence remained one of the defining features of the investigation. Even as public speculation intensified, detectives consistently distinguished between suspicion and proof. At least 3 survivors were eventually identified and provided testimony that became essential to the prosecution. Their accounts helped investigators understand aspects of the case that physical evidence alone could not fully explain. At the same time, detectives interviewed additional women who might also have encountered Ray. Some information strengthened existing evidence, while other leads proved impossible to verify conclusively. Such uncertainty is common in long-running criminal investigations, particularly when significant time has passed and physical evidence is limited. As forensic teams continued examining the property, investigators confronted one of the most frustrating realities of the entire case. Despite the enormous quantity of evidence suggesting prolonged criminal activity, they found no confirmed human remains at the scene. This absence would shape every legal decision that followed. Detectives might reasonably suspect that additional crimes had occurred, but criminal courts require evidence capable of establishing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Without identifiable bodies or forensic evidence directly linking Ray to homicide, prosecutors faced legal limitations that could not simply be overcome by public belief or investigative intuition. This distinction between investigative suspicion and courtroom proof became one of the defining characteristics of the David Parker Ray case. Outside the property, national media attention continued to grow. Television crews reported from Elephant Butte, often describing the trailer using the nickname that would become permanently associated with the investigation. Public fascination increased as details emerged about the extensive evidence recovered inside. Yet investigators remained focused on a far less dramatic task: documenting facts with precision. Every photograph, every fingerprint, every handwritten page, every cassette, every videotape, and every personal belonging had to withstand the scrutiny of future court proceedings. Any mistake in evidence handling could jeopardize an otherwise strong prosecution. Looking back, investigators would often identify the search of Ray's property as the moment when an individual criminal complaint evolved into one of the most extensive investigations in New Mexico's history. The evidence recovered inside the trailer provided the foundation for charges that ultimately resulted in David Parker Ray receiving a sentence totaling 224 years in prison for kidnapping and related offenses. At the same time, the investigation exposed its own limitations. Even after the exhaustive search, fundamental questions remained unanswered. How many people had passed through the trailer? How many victims had never been identified? Could every recovered item ever be connected to its owner? And perhaps most importantly, did the evidence reveal the full extent of Ray's crimes, or only the portion that investigators were able to document after one woman's extraordinary escape? Those questions would continue to drive the investigation long after the search warrant had been executed, ensuring that the evidence collected inside the toy box would remain the subject of examination, debate, and reflection for years to come. Cynthia Vigil did not know that her decision to run would eventually expose one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in New Mexico's history. At the time, her only objective was survival. Everything that followed, the search warrants, the discovery of the trailer, the involvement of the FBI, the years of investigation, and the courtroom proceedings, began with a single opportunity that appeared during an otherwise ordinary morning in March 1999. Investigators would later describe her escape as the defining turning point of the entire case. Without it, there is every possibility that David Parker Ray's property would have remained hidden from law enforcement for much longer, and many of the questions that emerged after his arrest might never have been asked at all. According to the evidence presented during the investigation, Cynthia Vigil was taken to Ray's property on March 22, 1999. The prosecution later established that she had been held there against her will. Rather than focusing solely on the physical circumstances of her captivity, investigators also examined the psychological environment she found herself in. Victims of prolonged, unlawful confinement often experience intense fear, confusion, and uncertainty. They do not know what will happen next, whether anyone is looking for them, or whether escape is even possible. Every passing hour can reinforce a sense of isolation. In cases involving carefully controlled environments, psychological pressure can become as significant as physical restraint. Investigators believe that Ray understood this principle well and had designed many aspects of the trailer to maintain control over those held inside. Yet even in circumstances where hope appears almost non-existent, moments of opportunity can emerge unexpectedly. The following morning, David Parker Ray left the property to go to work. This detail would later become critically important because it demonstrated how ordinary routines continued alongside the criminal activity investigators alleged had been occurring for years. Ray reportedly departed for his maintenance job at Elephant Butte State Park as though it were any other workday. Remaining behind at the property was Cindy Hendy, Ray's girlfriend and later his co-defendant. According to prosecutors, Henny assumed responsibility for watching Cynthia Vigil while Ray was away. It was during this period that events began moving in a direction neither Ray nor Hendy anticipated. At some point, Hendy became distracted. The exact circumstances surrounding those moments were examined during the investigation. But what became clear was that Vigil recognized an opportunity. Opportunities to escape unlawful confinement are often brief and uncertain. Attempting to flee carries enormous risk. If unsuccessful, the consequences can be severe, and victims are acutely aware of that danger. Investigators later concluded that Vigil made an extraordinarily difficult decision within a matter of seconds. Rather than waiting for another chance that might never come, she acted immediately. According to the evidence presented in court, Vigil managed to obtain the key needed to free herself from her restraints. She unlocked them and prepared to flee the property. There was no guarantee she would reach safety. She did not know whether Ray might unexpectedly return, whether Hendy would stop her, or whether anyone nearby would believe her account if she reached another home. Yet remaining where she was offered no certainty either. Faced with those choices, she ran. The property sat within a quiet desert community where homes were separated by open land and stretches of road. For someone escaping under conditions of extreme stress, even a relatively short distance could feel overwhelming. Every step carried uncertainty. The possibility of being seen by the people from whom she was escaping remained real until she reached another residence. Eventually, Vigil arrived at a nearby house. The residents who encountered her immediately recognized that something was terribly wrong. According to the investigation, she was visibly distressed and urgently sought help. The homeowners did not dismiss her or hesitate to respond. Instead, they contacted emergency services without delay. That telephone call would become one of the most significant moments in the entire investigation. Within minutes, local law enforcement officers began responding to what initially appeared to be a kidnapping complaint. When officers met Cynthia Vigil, they found someone whose condition and account demanded immediate attention. As detectives began interviewing her, they realized that the allegations extended far beyond a conventional assault investigation. Vigil described being held against her while on David Parker Ray's property. She told investigators about the trailer located there and described an environment specifically prepared for confinement. Experienced investigators understand that the earliest witness statements can be crucial. They often contain observations made before memory becomes influenced by media reports or repeated questioning. Officers therefore carefully documented Vigil's account while simultaneously beginning the legal process required to secure and search the property she described. The decision to obtain a search warrant reflected a commitment to evidence rather than assumption. No matter how compelling a witness may appear, investigators must establish probable cause through legal procedures before entering private property. In this case, Vigil's statements provided sufficient grounds for judicial authorization. As preparations for the search moved forward, officers also took steps to secure the area and prevent the possible destruction of evidence. Time became a critical factor. If the allegations proved accurate, investigators needed to preserve the scene exactly as it existed at that moment. Once the warrant had been approved, law enforcement officers entered David Parker Ray's property. What they discovered would confirm that Vigil's escape had revealed something far larger than an isolated criminal act. The trailer she described existed exactly where she said it would be. Inside, investigators encountered the carefully modified environment that would later become known throughout the country. The evidence recovered there fundamentally changed the direction of the case. For Cynthia Vigil, however, the significance of her escape extended beyond exposing one offender. Her actions enabled investigators to identify additional victims and uncover evidence that otherwise might have remained hidden indefinitely. During the months that followed, law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to understand the full scope of what they had uncovered. Investigators reviewed evidence recovered from the property, interviewed witnesses, and compared personal belongings found inside the trailer with reports of missing individuals. At least 3 surviving victims were ultimately identified and later testified regarding their experiences. Their testimony helped establish patterns that investigators believed had developed over many years. Although many questions remained unanswered, the existence of additional survivors strengthened the prosecution's ability to demonstrate that Cynthia Vigil's account was not an isolated allegation. The investigation also focused on Cindy Hendy's role. Prosecutors argued that Hendy had actively participated in at least some of the crimes committed on the property. Her presence during Vigil's escape placed her at the center of one of the most important moments in the case. Ironically, the brief distraction that allowed Vigil to obtain the key ultimately led investigators directly to the evidence that would later support criminal convictions against both Hendy and Ray. During legal proceedings, investigators emphasized the sequence of events that connected Vigil's escape to every major discovery that followed. Without that single opportunity, officers would not have immediately obtained the search warrant. Without the search, they would not have recovered the extensive collection of physical evidence inside the trailer. Without that evidence, prosecutors would have faced far greater difficulty proving the charges that eventually resulted in David Parker Ray receiving a sentence totaling 224 years in prison and Cindy Hendy receiving a lengthy prison sentence for her role as a co-defendant. Even today, many investigators describe Cynthia Vigil not simply as a survivor, but as the individual whose courage fundamentally altered the course of the investigation. Her escape shifted the case from secrecy into public view. It transformed scattered suspicions into documented evidence and allowed law enforcement agencies to begin answering questions that had remained hidden for years. Yet her escape also highlighted the limits of criminal investigations. Although authorities uncovered a vast quantity of evidence after entering Ray's property, they never located confirmed human remains that could conclusively establish homicide charges. As a result, many of the broader questions surrounding David Parker Ray have never been fully resolved. How many victims were there? Were there crimes investigators never discovered? Could every unidentified personal belonging recovered from the trailer ever be traced to its owner? These uncertainties remain part of the legacy of the investigation. Nevertheless, one fact has never been disputed. On that morning in March 1999, one woman's determination to seize a fleeting opportunity changed everything. Cynthia Vigil's decision to run ended years of secrecy surrounding David Parker Ray's hidden world and initiated an investigation whose consequences continue to shape discussions of criminal justice, victim survival, and the importance of evidence more than 2 decades later. Once the initial search of David Parker Ray's property was complete, investigators quickly realized that their work had only begun. The discovery of the trailer and the evidence inside answered one question, but it created dozens of new ones. Cynthia Vigil's escape had provided a clear account of what had happened to her, and the physical evidence recovered from the property strongly supported many aspects of her statement. Yet as detectives stood among hundreds of collected exhibits waiting to be cataloged, they understood that the investigation had expanded far beyond a single victim. Every videotape, every handwritten note, every cassette recording every item of clothing, and every unidentified personal belonging suggested a possibility that no investigator wanted to ignore. There might have been many more victims whose stories had never reached the police. The responsibility now facing law enforcement was immense. They had to determine not only what crimes could be proven, but also whether the evidence pointed toward people who had disappeared years earlier. Local authorities soon received assistance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The quantity of material recovered from Ray's property demanded resources beyond those available to a small jurisdiction. Evidence technicians began the painstaking process of documenting every object removed from the trailer and surrounding buildings. Each item received its own identification number. Photographs were taken from multiple angles, and detailed records were created to preserve the chain of custody. Such procedures may appear routine, but in criminal prosecutions they are essential. A single mistake in documenting evidence can allow defense attorneys to challenge its reliability in court. Investigators therefore approached every object with extraordinary care, understanding that the credibility of the entire case depended upon precision rather than speed. Among the most striking discoveries were hundreds of videotapes and audio recordings. Each one required careful examination. Investigators could not simply assume that every recording contained evidence relevant to criminal charges. Every tape had to be viewed or listened to individually, documented, and compared with witness testimony. This work consumed an enormous amount of time. Detectives, forensic specialists, and federal agents worked systematically through the material, identifying dates whenever possible, examining locations, and attempting to determine whether individuals appearing in the recordings could be identified. The process demanded not only technical expertise, but also emotional resilience. Cases involving victims of prolonged abuse place a heavy burden on investigators who must repeatedly review difficult evidence while remaining objective enough to preserve its value in court. Alongside the recordings, officers recovered handwritten notebooks, diagrams, and written materials. These documents were analyzed line by line in an effort to reconstruct timelines and understand how Ray had organized activities on the property. Investigators compared names, dates, descriptions, and references with existing police reports and public records. Every written page represented a potential lead. Some information could be confirmed through independent evidence, while other references remained impossible to verify. As in many long-running investigations, not every question produced an answer. Nevertheless, detectives pursued every credible lead because even seemingly insignificant details sometimes become critical when viewed alongside other evidence. One of the largest tasks involved the more than 400 pieces of clothing, jewelry, and personal belongings recovered during the search. These objects immediately raised difficult questions. Who had owned them? Had they belonged to confirmed victims, unidentified victims, or individuals whose connection to Ray could not be established? Investigators carefully photographed every item and compared them against missing persons reports filed across New Mexico and neighboring states. Families searching for missing relatives were contacted when appropriate, and law enforcement agencies exchanged information in an attempt to identify possible matches. Despite these efforts, many of the recovered belongings could not be conclusively linked to specific individuals. The inability to identify every item became one of the enduring frustrations of the investigation. Each unidentified object represented both evidence and uncertainty, suggesting that the known victims might account for only part of the story. As publicity surrounding the investigation spread nationwide, additional women came forward to speak with investigators. Some reported encounters with David Parker Ray that helped detectives establish broader patterns of behavior. Others provided information that required careful verification before it could be incorporated into the case. At least 3 survivors were ultimately identified and testified during legal proceedings. Their accounts became crucial because they allowed prosecutors to demonstrate that the crimes were not isolated incidents involving only Cynthia Vigil. While every survivor's experience differed, together their testimony provided investigators with a clearer understanding of the methods used to control victims and the extended period over which the offenses had allegedly occurred. The expanding investigation also focused on people connected to Ray. Cindy Hendy, already arrested following Cynthia Vigil's escape, became an important subject of further inquiry. Investigators examined her role in the offenses and gathered evidence concerning her participation in crimes committed at the property. During court proceedings, prosecutors argued that Henny had actively assisted Ray during at least some incidents. Her presence on the day of Vigil's escape remained particularly significant because it linked her directly to the events that exposed the operation. Meanwhile, investigators also questioned Ray's daughter, Glenda Jean Ray. sometimes referred to as Jessie Ray. She ultimately cooperated with authorities and provided information regarding aspects of her father's activities. In exchange for that cooperation, she received immunity concerning certain matters addressed during the investigation. Her statements became one component of a much larger evidentiary picture built from physical evidence, witness testimony, and forensic analysis. As investigators continued assembling information, attention increasingly turned toward missing persons cases. Detectives reviewed reports from New Mexico as well as neighboring jurisdictions, searching for disappearances that might correspond with evidence recovered from Ray's property. This effort reflected one of the most difficult realities of criminal investigations involving unidentified victims. Missing persons files often remain open for years with limited information. Comparing those files against newly discovered evidence requires patience, coordination among agencies, and careful avoidance of unsupported conclusions. Investigators resisted pressure to speculate publicly about cases that could not be supported by evidence. They understood that families deserved honesty rather than false hope. One of the central questions soon became impossible to ignore: how many victims had there actually been? Investigators knew of Cynthia Vigil and identified at least 3 survivors whose testimony could be presented in court. Additional women were believed to have been victimized, and some individuals connected to the investigation alleged that Ray had harmed many more people. The Federal Bureau of Investigation reportedly considered the possibility that the number of victims might extend into the dozens. Yet suspicion, even when held by experienced investigators, is not the same as legal proof. The available evidence could establish certain crimes with confidence, but it could not conclusively determine the total number of victims. This distinction would remain one of the defining features of the entire case. Public fascination grew rapidly as newspapers and television programs reported on the extraordinary quantity of evidence recovered from the property. Many people assumed that the discovery of so many personal belongings meant investigators would quickly solve numerous disappearances. The reality proved far more complicated. Criminal investigations depend upon identifiable evidence, corroborating testimony, and forensic links capable of surviving judicial scrutiny. An unidentified piece of jewelry, no matter how emotionally significant, cannot by itself establish the identity of its owner or prove what happened to that individual. Investigators therefore continued approaching every lead with caution, determined to distinguish verified facts from understandable speculation. The absence of confirmed human remains complicated the investigation at every stage. Despite the large volume of physical evidence suggesting prolonged criminal conduct, no bodies were recovered from Ray's property. This reality profoundly affected prosecutorial decisions. Detectives may have believed that additional crimes had occurred, but prosecutors could pursue only charges supported by admissible evidence. Criminal courts require proof beyond a reasonable doubt, particularly in homicide cases. Without confirmed victims linked through forensic evidence, murder charges could not responsibly be filed. For many investigators, this legal limitation became one of the most frustrating aspects of the case. They believed there were questions still unanswered, yet they also understood that the integrity of the justice system depends upon evidence rather than assumption. As months passed, the investigation evolved into one of the largest and most complex criminal inquiries ever conducted in New Mexico. Thousands of investigative hours were devoted to examining recordings, interviewing witnesses, comparing evidence, and reviewing decades of missing persons reports. Every new lead was evaluated, every statement compared against existing evidence, and every recovered object cataloged with meticulous care. Although many mysteries remained unresolved, the investigation achieved something profoundly important. Cynthia Vigil's escape had opened the door to evidence that otherwise might never have been discovered, allowing investigators to identify survivors, secure convictions for serious crimes, and expose an operation that had remained hidden behind the ordinary appearance of a quiet mechanic's property. Yet even as prosecutors prepared for trial, detectives recognized that perhaps the greatest mystery still lay ahead. The evidence strongly suggested a history extending far beyond the crimes already documented. But whether that history would ever be fully reconstructed remained uncertain. The search for answers was no longer confined to a single trailer in Elephant Butte. It had become a search for people whose stories might never be completely known, a search defined as much by unanswered questions as by the evidence investigators had finally managed to uncover. As the investigation continued, the evidence recovered from David Parker Ray's property painted a picture of prolonged criminal activity. Yet one fundamental question remained unanswered. Where were the victims who had never come forward? Investigators had Cynthia Vigil's testimony, the accounts of at least 3 identified survivors, hundreds of pieces of physical evidence, recordings, handwritten documents, and personal belongings collected from the property. These discoveries were substantial enough to support serious criminal charges. However, they also pointed toward a possibility that was far more difficult to prove, that the known victims represented only a fraction of those who might have encountered Ray over the years. For law enforcement, this uncertainty became the defining challenge of the investigation. Every unanswered question led detectives toward another search, another interview, or another attempt to connect evidence with people who had vanished long before the case became public. The investigation soon expanded beyond the boundaries of Ray's property. Detectives and federal agents began examining the surrounding region, particularly areas that witnesses or investigative leads suggested might hold additional evidence. Elephant Butte itself became a central focus. The community is known for Elephant Butte Lake, one of the largest reservoirs in New Mexico. Surrounded by rugged desert terrain, isolated roads, and open stretches of land, investigators recognized that if evidence existed beyond the property, locating it would require a coordinated effort involving multiple agencies and specialized search teams. One of the first major operations involved searching the waters of Elephant Butte Lake. Dive teams carefully examined locations considered relevant to the investigation. Searching a large reservoir is an extraordinarily difficult task. Visibility beneath the water is often limited. Underwater currents can shift objects over time, and years may have passed since any potential evidence entered the lake. Even with experienced divers and specialized equipment, such searches rarely produce immediate answers. Nevertheless, investigators believed every reasonable lead deserved to be pursued. Their objective was not simply to confirm suspicions, but to determine whether physical evidence existed that could withstand forensic examination and legal scrutiny. At the same time, officers searched surrounding land areas using trained detection dogs and excavation equipment. Witness statements, investigative tips, and information gathered during interviews guided many of these searches. Detectives examined remote sections of desert terrain, isolated properties, and locations mentioned during the investigation. Each search followed established forensic procedures. Before excavation began, investigators documented the area, photographed the scene, and carefully recorded every stage of the process. If any evidence was discovered, maintaining its context would be essential for later forensic analysis. Despite the scale of these operations, the searches repeatedly illustrated one of the harsh realities of criminal investigation. Extensive effort does not always produce definitive results. During the course of these searches, human bone fragments were reportedly discovered in the broader area years later. Such discoveries naturally attracted significant public attention. Media reports quickly speculated about possible connections to David Parker Ray, and families of missing persons watched developments with understandable hope and anxiety. Yet forensic science demands caution. The mere discovery of human remains does not establish identity, cause of death, or connection to a particular suspect. Investigators therefore subjected every available fragment to scientific examination. Ultimately, Authorities were unable to conclusively determine that the remains belonged to any known victim associated with Ray. Nor could they establish a direct forensic connection between the remains and the crimes for which he had been charged. This outcome disappointed investigators, but it also reflected the discipline required in responsible criminal investigations. Conclusions must be based on evidence rather than possibility. As these searches continued, some associates alleged that Ray had been responsible for additional crimes, including killings. Such statements inevitably intensified public interest, but detectives understood that witness claims require independent corroboration. Criminal investigations cannot rely solely on accusations, regardless of how compelling they may appear. Every allegation had to be measured against physical evidence, forensic findings, documentary records, and corroborating testimony. In several instances, investigators found themselves confronting a recurring obstacle. There simply was not enough admissible evidence to transform suspicion into prosecutable homicide charges. This distinction between investigative belief and courtroom proof became increasingly significant as the case developed. Public discussion often referred to David Parker Ray as a suspected serial killer, largely because investigators considered the possibility that the known victims represented only part of a much larger pattern. The Federal Bureau of Investigation reportedly explored the possibility that the number of victims could have reached into the dozens. Such assessments reflected investigative concern based on the quantity of evidence recovered from the property and the apparent duration of Ray's criminal activity. However, investigators consistently acknowledged an equally important fact. They could not verify those numbers. No confirmed body was directly linked to Ray through forensic evidence. No homicide conviction could be obtained without satisfying the legal standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In the courtroom, possibilities are not enough. Evidence must establish guilt with certainty sufficient to meet the law's highest burden. This legal reality shaped every decision prosecutors ultimately made. Some observers questioned why murder charges were never filed if investigators suspected that additional crimes had occurred. The answer lies in one of the fundamental principles of criminal justice. Prosecutors are ethically obligated to pursue only charges supported by evidence they believe can be proven before a jury. Filing unsupported homicide charges may satisfy public expectations in the short term, but it risks acquittal and undermines confidence in the justice system. In Ray's case, prosecutors possessed substantial evidence supporting charges involving kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and related offenses. They did not possess equally strong forensic evidence establishing homicide. Consequently, they focused on crimes that could be proven rather than allegations that remained unverified. This decision reflected legal discipline rather than investigative indifference. For the families of missing persons, however, the distinction offered little comfort. Across New Mexico and neighboring states, individuals whose loved ones had disappeared wondered whether the investigation might finally provide long-awaited answers. Detectives carefully reviewed missing persons files, compared available evidence, and attempted to identify links wherever possible. Yet many cases remained unresolved. Some families found themselves caught between hope and uncertainty, uncertain whether to believe that new evidence might eventually emerge or to accept that certain questions could remain unanswered indefinitely. Investigators shared much of that frustration. They had uncovered extraordinary evidence indicating years of serious criminal conduct, but they could not reconstruct every event that may have occurred before Cynthia Vigil's escape. Another factor complicating the investigation was the passage of time. Evidence deteriorates. Witness memories fade. Records disappear. Physical locations change. Criminal investigations become increasingly difficult with every passing year, particularly when they involve offenses that may have occurred long before law enforcement became aware of them. Detectives recognized that if unidentified victims existed, some opportunities to recover decisive evidence might already have been lost. Nevertheless, They continued examining every credible lead because even delayed investigations sometimes produce unexpected breakthroughs. Throughout the investigation, authorities consistently emphasized the importance of separating confirmed facts from speculation. They confirmed that at least 3 survivors had been identified and that David Parker Ray had been successfully prosecuted for serious crimes supported by substantial evidence. They also acknowledged that investigators suspected additional victims might exist. At the same time, they avoided presenting suspicions as established fact. This careful distinction protected both the integrity of the investigation and the rights of all individuals involved. It also illustrated a broader truth about criminal justice. Investigators seek answers, but they must also recognize the limits of what evidence can prove. By the time prosecutors prepared the case for court, investigators had assembled one of the largest collections of evidence ever associated with a criminal investigation in New Mexico. Yet despite years of searching lakes, excavating land, interviewing witnesses, reviewing recordings, analyzing documents, and comparing hundreds of personal belongings with missing persons reports, one central mystery remained unresolved. How many people had actually become victims of David Parker Ray? The evidence suggested that the known cases did not tell the entire story. The law, however, could recognize only those crimes supported by admissible proof. Between those two realities, the investigators' suspicions and the evidence that could be established, beyond reasonable doubt, lay the enduring mystery that continues to surround the case. Even today, more than 2 decades after Ray's death, that gap remains one of the most haunting aspects of the investigation. It reminds us that while criminal investigations strive to uncover the complete truth, they are ultimately constrained by what evidence can demonstrate, not by what anyone believes may have happened. By the time David Parker Ray entered the courtroom, the investigation had already captured national attention. For more than 2 years, law enforcement agencies had worked to organize an enormous amount of evidence recovered from his property. Detectives had interviewed survivors, examined recordings, analyzed documents, searched for possible additional victims, and attempted to answer questions that continued to surround the case. Yet despite the disturbing discoveries made during the investigation, one reality remained unchanged. The criminal justice system could only proceed with charges supported by evidence strong enough to meet the requirements of a courtroom. The public had many questions about David Parker Ray, but prosecutors had to focus on what they could prove. This difference between public perception and legal responsibility would define the final stage of the case. The evidence against Ray was extensive. Investigators had recovered material demonstrating that victims had been held against their will and subjected to severe mistreatment. They had testimony from survivors, including Cynthia Vigil, whose escape had exposed the entire operation. They had physical evidence recovered from the trailer, including restraints, recording equipment, personal belongings, handwritten materials, and other items that supported the prosecution's case. However, despite the widespread belief that Ray may have been responsible for additional crimes, including possible murders, prosecutors did not have the evidence necessary to pursue homicide charges. No confirmed bodies had been linked to him. No forensic evidence conclusively established that he had killed anyone. In court, suspicion could not replace proof. The prosecution therefore focused on the crimes that could be demonstrated through evidence. The legal strategy centered on charges involving kidnapping, unlawful confinement. These charges reflected the serious harm inflicted upon the known survivors and were supported by testimony and physical evidence collected during the investigation. For prosecutors, the objective was not simply to present the most shocking accusations possible. It was to build a case that could survive legal examination and result in a conviction. The importance of this approach cannot be overstated. Criminal trials operate according to strict standards because the consequences of conviction are significant. A defendant can only be punished for crimes proven beyond a reasonable doubt. This principle exists to ensure that verdicts are based on evidence rather than emotion, public pressure, or speculation. The David Parker Ray case became an example of this distinction. Many people believe there were unanswered questions about his possible involvement in additional disappearances. Investigators themselves considered that possibility. But the courtroom required a different standard. What could be proven with reliable evidence? In 2001, David Parker Ray entered into a plea agreement. Rather than facing a full trial on all possible allegations, Ray pleaded guilty to charges related to kidnapping and torture. As part of the agreement, he received a sentence totaling 224 years in prison. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the crimes for which he was convicted and ensured that he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. Although the conviction did not answer every question surrounding the investigation, it established legal accountability for the offenses that prosecutors were able to prove. For many survivors, the conviction represented recognition of what they had endured. It confirmed that their experiences were real, that the evidence supported their accounts, and that the person responsible had been held accountable under the law. For investigators, the plea agreement represented both an achievement and a reminder of the case's unresolved aspects. They had successfully secured a conviction against a dangerous offender and removed him from society permanently. However, they also knew that some questions would likely never receive complete answers. The lack of confirmed homicide evidence meant that the investigation into possible additional victims could not reach the conclusion many people hoped for. Cindy Hendy, Ray's girlfriend and alleged accomplice, also faced criminal proceedings. Investigators determined that she had participated in at least some of the crimes connected to Ray. Her involvement became especially significant because she was present during Cynthia Vigil's captivity on the day Vigil escaped. Prosecutors argued that Hendy's actions made her responsible as a participant rather than merely a witness. Hendy was eventually convicted and sentenced for her role in the offenses. Her case demonstrated that the investigation was not focused solely on David Parker Ray himself, but also on individuals who assisted him. Another person connected to the investigation was Ray's daughter, Glenda Jean Ray, also known as Jessie Ray. Unlike Hendy, she cooperated with investigators and provided information about aspects of her father's activities. In exchange for her cooperation, she received immunity regarding certain matters addressed during the investigation. Her involvement illustrated another complex element of major criminal cases: the role of people close to offenders. Investigators often rely on information from individuals within a suspect's personal circle because such witnesses may have knowledge unavailable from outside sources. However, their information must still be carefully evaluated and compared against independent evidence. The conclusion of the criminal proceedings did not end public debate about the case. Many people continued asking whether Ray had been responsible for crimes beyond those proven in court. The large number of personal belongings recovered from his property remained a source of speculation. The existence of unidentified items suggested the possibility of additional victims. But investigators could not establish the identities of every person connected to those objects. Likewise, statements from some individuals raised concerns about possible murders. But allegations without supporting evidence could not result in homicide convictions. This uncertainty became one of the most frustrating aspects of the entire case. In many criminal investigations, the final courtroom outcome provides a sense of closure. A suspect is convicted, a sentence is imposed, and society receives a definitive answer about responsibility. The David Parker Ray case was different. The conviction answered some questions but left others unresolved. The legal system established what Ray had been proven to have done, but it could not determine everything investigators suspected. The difference between those two realities created a lasting sense of mystery surrounding the case. For law enforcement, the investigation represented years of difficult work. Detectives had uncovered evidence that might otherwise have remained hidden forever. They had identified survivors, documented crimes, and built a case strong enough to secure a lengthy prison sentence. Yet they also faced the limitations that accompany every investigation. Evidence can reveal much, but it cannot always reveal everything. Missing information cannot simply be replaced by assumption, no matter how convincing a theory may seem. This principle remained central throughout the prosecution of David Parker Ray. As the case moved beyond the courtroom, public attention remained focused on the victims. It was important that the story not become only about the offender, because the consequences of Ray's actions were experienced by real people whose lives were changed forever. The survivors who came forward demonstrated extraordinary courage in describing what they endured and assisting investigators. Their testimony became a crucial part of holding Ray and Hendy accountable. Without their willingness to speak, the investigation would have been far more difficult. The courtroom proceedings also highlighted the importance of survivor voices in criminal justice. Physical evidence can establish facts, but testimony provides human context. Survivors explain the impact of crimes in ways that documents and objects cannot. In the David Parker Ray case, their accounts transformed a collection of evidence into a clear understanding of the harm caused by the crimes. On paper, the investigation involved photographs, recordings, reports, and legal documents. But behind every piece of evidence were individuals whose experiences carried the greatest significance. When the court imposed Ray's sentence, the legal process had reached its conclusion regarding the charges that could be proven. David Parker Ray would spend the rest of his life in prison. Cindy Hendy would also face punishment for her involvement. Yet outside the courtroom, unanswered questions remained. The investigation had uncovered a hidden world that had existed for years, but it could not completely reconstruct every event connected to it. The case became a powerful example of both the strength and the limitations of the justice system. It demonstrated that determined investigators and courageous survivors could expose crimes that had been concealed for years. At the same time, it showed that even enormous investigations may leave certain questions unanswered when evidence is incomplete. The conviction of David Parker Ray provided accountability for the crimes proven in court, but it did not erase the uncertainty surrounding those who may never be identified. Those unresolved questions would continue to follow the case long after the courtroom proceedings ended. The investigation had reached a legal conclusion, but the search for understanding was far from over. The conviction of David Parker Ray brought a formal conclusion to one chapter of the investigation, but it did not bring complete closure. In many criminal cases, a guilty verdict and a prison sentence mark the final stage of the search for answers. The offender is convicted, the victims receive legal recognition, and society moves forward with a clearer understanding of what occurred. The case of David Parker Ray was different. Although the courts established his responsibility for kidnapping and severe abuse, many questions remained beyond the reach of the legal system. The investigation had uncovered a hidden world of criminal activity, but it could not determine the full extent of what had happened inside the trailer known as the Toy Box. For investigators, survivors, and families of missing individuals, the end of the trial represented not the end of uncertainty, but a new phase of trying to understand unanswered questions. One of the most difficult questions surrounding the case remained the number of victims. The evidence recovered from Ray's property suggested that his crimes had continued over a significant period of time. Investigators discovered hundreds of personal belongings, numerous recordings, written materials, and equipment indicating extensive preparation. These findings led many law enforcement officials to believe that the known victims might not represent the complete number of people affected by Ray. However, belief and proof remained two separate matters. The investigation identified survivors who could provide testimony, but it could not establish the identities of every person connected to the evidence recovered from the property. For every item that could not be traced, another question remained unanswered. Investigators continued reviewing missing persons reports and examining possible connections, but many cases could not be conclusively linked to Ray. The absence of confirmed human remains created one of the greatest obstacles in determining the full scope of his crimes. In criminal investigations, Physical evidence can be the difference between suspicion and certainty. Without identifiable remains, investigators could not prove that specific missing individuals had died or establish Ray's responsibility for their deaths. This limitation prevented prosecutors from bringing homicide charges despite the concerns expressed by investigators. It was a frustrating reality. The evidence suggested that more questions existed, but the law required answers supported by facts that could withstand courtroom examination. The investigation into possible additional victims continued even after Ray's conviction. Law enforcement agencies examined locations connected to the case, reviewed evidence again, and considered new information as it became available. Searches had already been conducted in areas investigators believed might contain evidence, including locations around Elephant Butte. Teams had used specialized equipment, trained dogs, and excavation methods in an effort to locate additional information. Yet these efforts did not produce the definitive discoveries needed to resolve every unanswered question. Some evidence was recovered during searches, including human bone fragments found in the broader region years later. But authorities could not conclusively connect those remains to Ray or any specific victim associated with the case. This uncertainty remained one of the most significant aspects of the investigation. The case demonstrated that even when investigators uncover an enormous amount of evidence, there are situations where the complete truth may remain partially hidden. Another lasting question involved the role of possible additional individuals connected to Ray. Investigators established the involvement of Cindy Hendy, who was convicted for her role in the crimes. They also received cooperation from Ray's daughter, Glenda Jean Ray, who provided information about her father's activities. However, speculation continued regarding whether other people may have assisted Ray or known more than they revealed. Investigators examined various possibilities, but they were unable to establish a larger network of participants through evidence sufficient for prosecution. Again, the distinction between suspicion and proof shaped the outcome. Criminal investigations must identify specific actions, specific individuals, and specific evidence. General concerns, even when reasonable, cannot substitute for legally admissible proof. Over time, the David Parker Ray case became widely discussed in the media and among researchers of criminal behavior. Much of this attention focused on the unusual nature of the evidence recovered from the property and the fact that the investigation began only because of a survivor's escape. However, investigators and victim advocates repeatedly emphasized that the central focus should remain on those who suffered rather than the individual responsible for the crimes. Stories about offenders often receive significant public attention, but the consequences of crime are experienced most deeply by victims and survivors. In this case, survivors played a crucial role in ensuring that the truth became known. Their willingness to cooperate with investigators provided information that physical evidence alone could not reveal. Cynthia Vigil, in particular, became the person whose actions initiated the discovery of the crimes. Her escape demonstrated extraordinary determination under circumstances designed to create fear and helplessness. By reaching a nearby home and seeking help, she transformed a hidden crime scene into a public investigation. Her decision allowed law enforcement to intervene, recover evidence, and identify additional survivors. Without her actions, the investigation might have taken a very different path. The case also influenced broader discussions about how law enforcement responds to reports of missing persons and individuals who may be vulnerable to exploitation. Investigators were reminded that unusual or isolated reports can sometimes represent a much larger pattern. The discovery of Ray's crimes demonstrated the importance of communication between agencies, careful documentation of evidence, and attention to details that might initially appear unrelated. While no investigation can guarantee every question will be answered, thorough cooperation among law enforcement agencies can increase the likelihood of uncovering hidden crimes. Another important lesson from the case involved the difference between public understanding and Legal conclusions. Outside the courtroom, many people viewed David Parker Ray through the broader allegations surrounding him. The nickname associated with the case became widely known, and public discussion often focused on the possibility that he had committed crimes beyond those proven. Inside the courtroom, however, the focus remained narrower. Judges and prosecutors were concerned with evidence, legal standards, and charges that could be established beyond reasonable doubt. This difference explains why Ray could receive a sentence of 224 years for kidnapping and related crimes while never being convicted of murder. The two realities existed at the same time. Investigators suspected a larger history, but the legal system could only punish the crimes proven through evidence. David Parker Ray's death in 2002 added another layer of finality to the unanswered questions. While serving his sentence in a New Mexico prison, Ray died of a heart attack on May 28, 2002. His death occurred before investigators could obtain any additional information from him through further questioning or legal proceedings. For detectives who believed he might hold answers about missing individuals, his death represented the loss of a possible source of information. Whatever knowledge Ray possessed about unresolved cases died with him. For families still searching for missing loved ones, this meant that some possibilities for answers disappeared permanently. The death of an offender can bring a sense of closure in some cases, but it can also create a painful reality for those seeking information. In the years that followed, the name David Parker Ray remained associated with one of the most complex criminal investigations in New Mexico history. The case continued to be studied because it contained several elements that made it unusual. A hidden location designed for criminal activity, extensive physical evidence, surviving victims who exposed the crimes, and unresolved questions about possible additional offenses. Yet the most important part of the case remained the human impact. Behind every investigation file, every evidence photograph, and every courtroom argument were individuals whose lives had been permanently changed. The lasting significance of the case is not only found in the actions of the offender, but also in the courage of survivors, the dedication of investigators, and the importance of seeking truth even when complete answers may never be found. The story of David Parker Ray ultimately represents both discovery and uncertainty. Investigators succeeded in uncovering a hidden criminal operation and securing accountability for pauvre crime. Survivors gained recognition and validation through the legal process. Yet the absence of confirmed answers regarding additional victims left a shadow over the case. It remains a reminder that justice does not always provide every answer, even when enormous efforts are made to uncover the truth. Some mysteries remain unresolved not because people stop searching, but because evidence has limits. For those affected by the case, that uncertainty continues to be the most painful part of its legacy. The story of David Parker Ray remains one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in American history, not only because of the crimes for which he was convicted, but because of the unanswered questions that continued long after his death. The investigation revealed a hidden environment that had existed behind the appearance of an ordinary life. A man who worked as a mechanic and maintenance employee had constructed a private space that investigators believed was designed for prolonged criminal activity. The discovery of that hidden world forced law enforcement, the public, and the families of missing individuals to confront an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes the most serious crimes are not discovered through traditional investigations, but through the courage of a survivor who finds a way to escape. The case became known not simply because of the evidence collected, but because of the difficult questions it raised about how many victims might never be identified and how much of the truth can remain hidden despite a major investigation. In the years after Ray's conviction, investigators continued to examine the evidence and consider possible connections between his activities and unresolved missing persons cases. The process was complicated by the lack of definitive information. While the evidence recovered from the property demonstrated that Ray had committed serious crimes, It did not provide a complete record of every person who may have been involved. The personal belongings, recordings, and documents collected during the investigation created a picture of extensive criminal behavior. But they did not automatically reveal the identities or stories of every individual connected to those materials. Each unidentified item represented a possibility. But possibilities alone could not provide legal answers. Detectives had to work within the boundaries of evidence, knowing that some questions might never be resolved. This was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the case. Investigators were faced with a situation where they had uncovered enough evidence to prove significant crimes, yet they lacked the information required to fully reconstruct the entire history of Ray's activities. In many criminal cases, investigators build a timeline by connecting physical evidence, witness accounts, and documented events. With David Parker Ray, that timeline remained incomplete. Some events could be confirmed through survivor testimony and recovered evidence, while others existed only as suspicions or unverified claims. This gap between what investigators believed might have occurred and what could be proven became one of the defining characteristics of the case. The legal system could establish responsibility for proven offenses, but it could not provide certainty about crimes that lack sufficient evidence. The role of survivors remained central to understanding the significance of the investigation. Without Cynthia Vigil's escape, the evidence inside the trailer might never have been discovered. Her decision to seek help transformed an individual act of survival into an investigation that exposed years of hidden criminal activity. Her testimony, along with the testimony of other identified survivors, provided essential information that allowed prosecutors to demonstrate the seriousness of Ray's offenses. Physical evidence showed what investigators had found, but survivor accounts explained the human reality behind those discoveries. They revealed that the objects collected from the property were not merely evidence items. They represented experiences endured by real people. The case also highlighted the importance of listening to survivors and treating their accounts with seriousness and respect. Before the investigation became public, the criminal activity remained hidden. The breakthrough did not come from a confession, a routine police discovery, or a dramatic investigative operation. It came because one survivor found an opportunity to escape and authorities responded quickly. This sequence demonstrated how important immediate response and careful investigation can be in cases involving vulnerable victims. The actions of the people who answered Cynthia Vigil's call for help were also significant. By contacting authorities and allowing her to receive assistance, they played a role in the chain of events that eventually exposed the crimes. The investigation that followed required cooperation among local police, federal agents, forensic specialists, prosecutors, and witnesses. Each group contributed different skills and knowledge. Detectives collected and analyzed evidence. Forensic specialists examined materials recovered from the property. Prosecutors evaluated which charges could be supported in court. Survivors provided testimony that connected evidence to human experiences. Together, these efforts produced a conviction, even though they could not answer every question. The case demonstrated both the power and the limitations of the criminal justice system. It showed that determined investigators can uncover crimes that remain hidden for years. It also showed that evidence has boundaries. No matter how extensive an investigation becomes, there are situations where the available information cannot establish the complete truth. This reality can be difficult for victims' families, investigators, and the public to accept. People naturally want every mystery solved and every question answered. However, the justice system must operate according to standards that protect accuracy and fairness. A person cannot be convicted of a crime simply because investigators believe it occurred. There must be evidence that proves responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. The David Parker Ray case remains an example of this principle. The evidence was sufficient to secure a conviction for kidnapping and related crimes, but it was not sufficient to prove homicide charges. This distinction was not a reflection of the seriousness of the crimes discovered. Rather, it reflected the requirements of the legal process. Another lasting aspect of the case is the way it changed public understanding of hidden criminal behavior. Many people imagine dangerous offenders as individuals who are obviously threatening or isolated from society. Ray's case challenged that assumption. Investigators discovered that he had maintained an outward appearance of normality while allegedly engaging in serious crimes in private. This contrast became one of the reasons the case received such attention. It demonstrated that criminal behavior can exist behind an ordinary public image and that communities must rely on evidence and awareness rather than assumptions about who may or may not be capable of committing serious offenses. However, focusing on this contrast does not mean suggesting that warning signs are always visible or that communities can easily identify offenders before crimes occur. The complexity of human behavior means that many offenders successfully conceal harmful actions from people around them. The responsibility for investigating crimes belongs to law enforcement, not to victims or ordinary citizens who may have no reason to suspect wrongdoing. The legacy of the David Parker Ray investigation is therefore not simply a story about a criminal offender. It is also a story about the people who survived, the investigators who worked to uncover the truth, and the families who continued searching for answers. It is about the difficult process of pursuing justice when evidence is incomplete and certainty is impossible. The case continues to be discussed because it represents a situation where many facts were uncovered, yet some mysteries remained beyond resolution. Years after the investigation ended, the questions surrounding possible additional victims continue to exist. Were there other people who encountered Ray but were never identified? Were there missing persons cases that could have been connected but never proven? Did some evidence disappear before investigators could recover it? These questions remain unanswered. David Parker Ray's death closed the possibility of obtaining further information directly from him. Whatever knowledge he possessed about unresolved cases disappeared when he died in 2002. For investigators, this meant losing a potential source of answers. For families searching for missing loved ones, it meant accepting that some questions might never be resolved. Yet the end of the investigation did not erase the importance of what was accomplished. The crimes that were proven were acknowledged. The survivors who came forward were heard. The offender was held accountable. The evidence recovered from the property ensured that the hidden reality of Ray's actions could no longer remain concealed. Ultimately, the David Parker Ray case serves as a reminder of the complicated nature of justice. Sometimes the truth emerges gradually, through the courage of survivors and the persistence of investigators. Sometimes the evidence provides clear answers. Sometimes it leaves painful gaps that cannot be filled. The case remains a powerful example of both outcomes. It shows that even when every question cannot be answered, the pursuit of truth still matters. It shows that survivors' voices can change the course of history. And it shows that behind every criminal investigation are human beings whose lives, memories, and experiences deserve to remain at the center of the story. The conclusion of the David Parker Ray investigation did not arrive with the complete certainty that many people expected from a criminal case of such magnitude. There was a conviction, a prison sentence, and a clear legal judgment regarding the crimes that prosecutors were able to prove. Yet the investigation left behind a number of unanswered questions that continue to define the case. Decades later, the evidence recovered from the property, the testimony of survivors, and the work of investigators revealed a hidden reality that had existed for years. At the same time, the limitations of evidence meant that the full extent of what happened may never be completely known. The case became a reminder that justice can sometimes provide accountability without providing every answer. For those who lived through the events, those who investigated them, and those who continued searching for information about missing individuals, that distinction remained deeply significant. The story of David Parker Ray began with an ordinary appearance. For years, he lived in New Mexico, worked as a mechanic, and maintained a life that did not immediately attract public suspicion. To people who knew him casually, he appeared to be someone with practical skills and a routine occupation. Yet behind that public image, investigators later discovered evidence of a hidden criminal environment that had been carefully developed over time. The trailer known as the Toy Box became the central symbol of the investigation because it represented the contrast between what could be seen from the outside and what remained concealed within. The discovery of that trailer changed the course of the case permanently. What began as the investigation of Cynthia Vigil's escape expanded into a much larger examination of possible crimes committed over many years. The importance of the case cannot be separated from the actions of the survivors who came forward. Cynthia Vigil's escape was the moment that exposed Ray's activities to law enforcement. Her ability to recognize an opportunity and seek help allowed investigators to enter a situation that otherwise might have remained hidden. Her testimony became a critical part of the prosecution's case, not only because it described what happened to her personally, but because it helped investigators understand the nature of the evidence they discovered. Other survivors who later cooperated with authorities also played an essential role. Their willingness to speak provided information that could not have been obtained from physical evidence alone. In criminal investigations, evidence often consists of objects, documents, and recordings. However, survivors provide the context that explains what those materials mean. They transform a collection of items into a human story. They remind investigators, prosecutors, and the public that behind every piece of evidence is a person whose life has been affected. The investigation into David Parker Ray also demonstrated the importance of careful and methodical police work. Once the property was searched, authorities faced an enormous task. They had to examine hundreds of items, analyze recordings, review written materials, interview witnesses, and compare evidence against missing persons reports. The process required patience and accuracy. Investigators could not simply assume that every recovered object represented a specific crime or every allegation could be confirmed. They had to separate facts from possibilities and build a case based on evidence that could withstand legal examination. This approach sometimes created frustration because the public wanted immediate answers. However, the investigation had to follow the standards required by the justice system. Those standards exist to ensure that conclusions are based on proof rather than speculation. One of the most important lessons from the case is the difference between what investigators suspect and what prosecutors can prove. Throughout the investigation, authorities considered the possibility that Ray may have been responsible for additional crimes beyond those for which he was convicted. The large number of personal belongings recovered from the property, statements from individuals connected to the investigation, and the apparent length of Ray's criminal activity contributed to those concerns. However, suspicion alone cannot establish criminal responsibility in court. Without confirmed victims, identifiable remains, or forensic evidence directly connecting Ray to specific murders, homicide charges could not be pursued successfully. The legal outcome reflected this reality. Ray was convicted of kidnapping and related crimes and received a sentence totaling 224 years. He was never convicted of murder because the evidence required for such charges was not available. This distinction remains one of the most discussed aspects of the case. Some people view the absence of murder convictions as a sign that unanswered questions remain. Others view it as an example of the justice system correctly applying the standard of proof. Both perspectives reflect the complexity of the investigation. The case was not simply about what people believe may have happened. It was about what could be demonstrated through evidence. The role of accomplices also shaped the final outcome. Cindy Hendy was identified as someone who participated in Ray's crimes and was convicted for her involvement. Her actions placed her within the criminal proceedings and showed that the investigation was not limited to Ray alone. Meanwhile, Ray's daughter, Glenda Jean Ray, provided information to investigators, and cooperated with authorities. These different forms of involvement demonstrated the complicated relationships that often appear in major criminal investigations. People close to offenders may become witnesses, accomplices, or sources of information, and investigators must carefully determine each person's responsibility based on evidence. After David Parker Ray died in prison in 2002, the possibility of obtaining further information directly from him ended. His death occurred before investigators could resolve every remaining question about possible additional victims. For some families, this meant losing the possibility of receiving answers from the person who might have known the truth. For investigators, it meant that some investigative paths were permanently closed. The death of an offender does not always bring complete closure. In some cases, it creates another layer of uncertainty because opportunities for further questioning disappear forever. Despite these unresolved issues, the significance of the investigation remains clear. It exposed crimes that had been hidden from authorities and led to convictions based on evidence. It demonstrated the importance of survivor courage, professional investigation, and the careful application of justice. It also revealed the challenges faced when investigators attempt to reconstruct events that occurred over many years with incomplete information. The case continues to be studied not because of the offender's notoriety, but because it raises important questions about victims, evidence, and the pursuit of truth. The lasting impact of the case should ultimately be understood through the experiences of those affected. The focus should not remain only on the individual responsible for the crimes, but on the survivors who endured unimaginable circumstances and found the strength to seek help. Their actions changed the course of the investigation. They allowed law enforcement to uncover evidence, identify additional victims, and prevent further harm. Their voices became central to ensuring that the crimes were recognized and that accountability was achieved. The David Parker Ray case also serves as a reminder that every investigation has limits. Even the most dedicated investigators cannot always recover every missing piece of information. Evidence can be lost, memories can fade, and some answers may disappear with time. This reality does not make the search for truth meaningless. Instead, it highlights why every piece of verified information matters and why every survivor who comes forward can make a difference. In the end, the story of David Parker Ray is not defined only by the crimes committed or the unanswered questions that remain. It is also defined by the moment when secrecy ended, when a survivor reached safety, and when investigators began uncovering the truth. It is a story about the challenges of pursuing justice in the face of uncertainty. It is a story about the difference between suspicion and proof, between what is feared and what can be demonstrated. Most importantly, it is a reminder that behind every criminal case are real people whose lives deserve recognition and respect. The investigation may never provide every answer, but it permanently changed what was known about David Parker Ray and ensured that the crimes discovered would not remain hidden forever.